What's up, guys? Neil Orfield here, and I'm going to show you how I'm setting up my fantasy cruncher for tonight's single game slate on FanDuel. I'm going to start on this main screen by finding the quick view that I like for columns, which I set up ahead of time. Save this as a quick view for me so I can see projections, how much I'm using, different players, my exposure caps, their projected ownership, etc., etc. So I set this up just the way I like it. You can set yours how you like it as well and save it here in the column setting. From there, though, I just go straight to the advanced options, and I'm only using two tabs when I'm setting up my fantasy cruncher for these single game slates. They are the general tab and the groups tab. In the general tab, I start here, unique players per lineup. I leave that at 1. I can have lineups that are just one player away from each other. I'm happy with that on a single game slate. Max salary to be used. So if you use your full salary, that would be 60,000 on FanDuel. That's the salary cap on FanDuel. I don't set a minimum here. I do set a maximum as a way to get unique relative to players who are trying to use their entire salary cap because they assume those lineups are better, and typically they do project better. Those lineups are more likely to put up high scores, but I'm not looking to put up high score. I'm looking to make a lot of money if my lineup hits. So I do set a max salary cap tonight, each night on single game slates. I think tonight in particular is a night that you could consider leaving a little bit more than you normally would, just because I think this is kind of an ugly game, and there are some mid-range options who project a little bit worse than the high-end options, but not a ton worse. And I think if they put up a touchdown, they could easily outscore their higher projected teammates. So I think that it makes sense tonight to leave a little bit more than you normally would in this max salary cap field. You do it in $500 increments on FanDuel. That's how players are priced on FanDuel. So let's just say tonight we're going to leave at 58,000. So you're leaving a full $2,000 on the table. And I think that that's a pretty safe thing to do tonight, just based on the how many different options there are and how many different salary price points there are, and players looking pretty good at different price points. Offensive player versus defense, I'm going to change this to 4, which means that I could get the Browns defense against 4 Steelers players, and I'm comfortable doing that. It's a nice, easy way to get different. A lot of players are not going to want to play a defense against 4 players from the opposing team, and I understand why. But sometimes the defense is actually the highest scoring play from a team. So sometimes, if Pittsburgh goes off and Cleveland sputters tonight, you could have 4 Pittsburgh players in the optimal lineup and then just have the Cleveland defense, because the Cleveland offense doesn't do anything. Maybe the Cleveland defense has a pick 6, or just has a number of sacks or a couple turnovers, and they're the highest scoring play from Cleveland. So I'm going to set that at max of 4 players. Global exposure cap, I'm going to leave at 100%. So theoretically, I could have 100% of some players. I probably won't end up there, and if I did, maybe I would cut back on a night like tonight, where there's no players I want to have in 100% of my lineups tonight. But I'm going to leave that at 100 for now. Minimum projection included in calculation, currently set to 3. I'll probably leave it at 3, and just if there are players that I want in my player pool who are projected for 3 or fewer fantasy points, I guess just fewer than 3 fantasy points, I will give those players slight boosts to their projection to make sure that they are in my potential player pool. Guys, let me take a break here to tell you that you can get access to all of our Stokastic Plus NFL tools for showdown and single game slates for only $1. Click the link in the description of this video below, or use promo code PRIMETIME, that's PRIMETIME, all caps, at checkout to get 1 week of our NFL Primetime package for only $1. This includes full access to all the premium content and tools for NFL DFS that we have to offer for showdown and single game slates, including player projections, ownership projections, top plays, lineup builder, and our expert Discord. This offer is only valid through September 29th. Please note that Fantasy Cruncher is an add-on and is not included with this promo. That'll do it for the general tab, and the other tab I use is this groups tab, where I set some groups, such as if I have a quarterback in the MVP spot, I will give boost to their pass catchers, or maybe require pass catchers from their team to be in the flex spot. I'll start with Trubisky here. So I'm putting him as the key player. So this group is going to be any lineup that has Mitch Trubisky in the MVP spot. What do I want the rest of the lineup to look like? And for me, that means adding some Steelers pass catchers in at the flex spot. So I'm going to add all those Steelers pass catchers to a group. And I'm including the running backs as pass catchers. We know that Najee Harris gets a good amount of volume in the passing game. All right, so that is the entire group. And you could say only apply plus minus adjustments, which would mean, you're not requiring any one player from this group to be in the lineup. You're just saying, I want to give these players boosts, either positive or negative. I'm not going to do that for this group because Mitch Trubisky, when he's scoring fantasy points, it's typically through the air, and most likely it's going to be through one of these options. I don't think that he's likely to throw it to a player who's not in the player pool. I could be wrong about that, but I don't foresee that for tonight at least. So I'm going to include all of these players in a group, and I'm going to say I want to have at least one player from this group in each lineup that has Mitch Trubisky in the MVP spot. You could even say at least two. Again, Mitch Trubisky just doesn't do much on the ground. And if he's passing it too much to one receiver, that receiver is likely to outscore him because for every passing play, the receiver does score more fantasy points than the quarterback. But I think I'm just going to leave it at one in particular on FanDuel. It's not a full point per reception, so the receiver doesn't score quite as many points per receiving play relative to the quarterback. So I'm just going to leave it at one, but then I'm going to give boost to some of these receiving options. So I am more likely to have more than one in lineups with Trubisky in the MVP spot. And this is sort of arbitrary, the amount of boost that I'm giving here. You could give them more or less. Sometimes I give a lower boost to players like Deontay Johnson because of the price tag, and I have concerns about, if he does too well, he's probably going to outscore Trubisky. There is a little bit of a gap in their salary here, which helps a little bit with those concerns. So I think that maybe I'll give a pretty big boost for even Deontay Johnson here. All right, so now in every lineup that has Mitch Trubisky in the MVP spot, I'm requiring at least one player from this group, and I'm also giving boosts to the projections for every player in this group. So it makes it more likely that I get multiple Pittsburgh receivers, pass catching options in lineups with Mitch Trubisky at MVP. I'm naming this group Trubisky MVP. And then I'm going to do the exact same thing with Jacoby Brissett. Make a group with Brissett in the MVP spot as my key player. And then I'll go through and add all of these different Browns receiving options. And I think the biggest decision point you're making here is whether to include one or two players from these groups, because I think it's pretty unlikely that either Trubisky or Brissett is the MVP without having at least one of their receivers have a pretty good game. It could happen. They could have, a couple goal line touchdowns and be optimal without having any receivers have particularly great games. That is within the realm of possibility, and not many people will have that lineup. So it would be a unique lineup to have one of these quarterbacks in the MVP spot without any receivers there. But most likely, if they have a big enough game to be in the MVP spot, they're bringing at least one pass catcher along, and it's even, I think, likely that they bring along two, just because if they're concentrated too much to one receiver, as I said, that receiver might outscore them. But I'm just going to leave it at one and then give boost to these pass catchers. Again, there's no real rhyme or reason to the exact number that I'm giving here. I think I'll give a little bit of a boost to Kareem Hunt. I just set, some numbers there for to start, and then if the lineups aren't looking the way that I want them to, then I'll come back to the screen and I'll give bigger or smaller boosts based on how the lineups look. So it's not that important to me how I set these numbers to begin with, but this is typically around the numbers that I set them at to start. Now on DraftKings, I did make more groups where I said if I have Trubisky in a flex spot, then I want at least one of his pass catchers somewhere else in the lineup, and I did the same thing with Brissett. I don't think that you necessarily need to do that for FanDuel. I've seen it work out more frequently on FanDuel where quarterback, a non-rushing quarterback even makes it into the flex spot without bringing along another receiver with them. Maybe it's a little bit less likely now that we have defenses involved too, but I don't think I'm going to set those groups. But I think that's a group you could consider making, and maybe I will. If I get too many lineups that have either Brissett or Trubisky in a flex spot without a pass catcher, I probably would go back and make that group. But if I get a couple of those lineups, I think I'm happy with that in my lineup set. So I'm just going to crunch. I'm going to change this to use my projections. Oh, and another thing that I do is in the MVP spot. Currently, I could potentially get 100% of one player in the MVP spot, particularly on a night like tonight. I think I would rather spread out who I have at MVP. So I'm going to change that to a global exposure cap of 20%. You could consider even 10% on a night like tonight, but I'll keep it at 20% for now. And I'll crunch 150 lineups and see what they look like. So the very first lineup we see here is lineup. So the Trubisky, that group worked out. I got Trubisky with 3 of his pass catchers here. I'm happy with that. And then just Jacoby Brissett in the flex spot. You have to ask yourself, are you comfortable with that? With having just Jacoby Brissett, what's the likelihood that Jacoby Brissett ends up in the flex spot without one of his receivers outscoring him? I think there's some possibility here because it's not point per reception on FanDuel. So if Brissett spreads it out, it is possible that he could be the optimal, get enough points through the air without one of his receivers outscoring him. This lineup looks a little better. Brissett has Donovan Peoples-Jones. Interesting. Browns in the MVP spot with Brissett in the flex. Anyway, these are at the very least kind of interesting options. Okay, I don't know that I love this one. So this one has Brissett in the MVP spot. I only required one of his pass catchers in my lineups, and I had Nick Chubb in that group. So Nick Chubb came in as the only pass catcher for Brissett. I don't love that. Nick Chubb probably doesn't catch it enough. So maybe I should remove Nick Chubb from that group or give him a negative boost. I don't know. Probably doesn't make sense to give him a negative boost. Probably I could just remove Nick Chubb from that group. I don't want him to be the only pass catcher there, but it could happen. Nick Chubb, has a receiving touchdown, could be the optimal with Brissett. So it's not the end of the world, but I don't know that I want to see too many lineups with Jacoby Brissett as the MVP and only Nick Chubb among his receiving options in the flex. But after I look at this, I would go back and I go through each of these tabs, look at how much am I getting of different players. Am I comfortable with those numbers? Currently getting 47% Trubisky, 41% Brissett. That seems fine. Not getting a ton of Kareem Hunt. Do I want more Kareem Hunt? He seems to have some upside, so I would probably give him a little boost. I have my minimum to be included in projections at 3, so I'm not going to be getting any Jalen Warren if he's at 2.99. Maybe give him a little bit of a boost, try to get some Jalen Warren at only 4.1% projected ownership. You could consider doing the same for guys like, Derek Watt, Benny Snell. How likely is it those guys make it into the optimal? Not especially likely, but they're not getting any ownership. George Pickens looks pretty interesting, only 8.4%. I'm not getting a ton of him. I'd probably like to be above the field. Maybe I'll go and give him a little bit of a boost, see if I can get a little bit more Pickens. Not getting any Amari Cooper. I'm not really comfortable with that. I'd like to get some Amari Cooper. I don't have this sorted by salary. Okay. David Bell, I want him to be in my player pool for sure. I'll give him a little bit of a boost. Demetric Felton, not as sure, but I'll give him a little bit of a boost. Anthony Schwartz. Anybody you want to be in your player set, got to make sure they have a projection of at least 3, unless you lower that minimum to be included number. Harrison Bryant. Interesting that Harrison Bryant is more expensive than David Njoku here. That probably explains why Harrison Bryant is only 2.8% owned. I'd like to get some of each of them along with the Muth. All right, so these are not final numbers. As I've said before, I'm going to be crunching several times. I'm just changing these projections very incrementally to kind of, see what comes out. I don't know that I want 40% of each defense. Maybe. I don't know. It's going to be an ugly game. It wouldn't be the worst game to have 40% of the defenses. But I'm not going to change those numbers, and I should get less of them just by virtue of changing projections for other players. Naturally, the defense ownership will come down a little bit. Yep. So it looks like they came down a little bit. Still not getting any Chris Boswell. Maybe I want to give him a little bit more of a boost. But anyway, this is just kind of showing you my typical process, what I'm doing when I'm setting these lineups. I'm looking at how owned are the players, how much of the players do I really want to get to. Typically, I'll look at the Stokastic single game tool. We've got a tool that shows you, based on 10,000 simulations, how much do we expect players to be owned, and then how often did players show up in the optimal in those 10,000 simulations. So I find the single game tool very useful on Stokastic. I'll use that to help me kind of decide how much I want of these various players. And then I'll kind of, go through and adjust projections accordingly. But that'll do it for now. I'm not going to go through and do all of my crunches with you. I'm just kind of showing you my general process and how I'm thinking as I'm making these lineups. Good luck tonight. Hope you win some money.